Alright, you guys, look at what I picked up. This is an Atari 600 XL, one of many popular 8-bit Atari home computers. Now Atari, pretty much right after the release of a 2600, they knew that they wanted to get into the home PC market. And in 1979 they came out with the first of the 8-bit line of home computers, and that was the Atari 400 and the Atari 800. Now, the Atari 400 and the Atari 800 were very similar. They were powered by a MOS Technologies 6502 8-bit processor. That's the same processor that's in both the Commodore 64 and, well, it's actually the basis of the Rico processor in the NES. Now, this one runs at 1.78 megahertz. And this particular machine has 16K of memory in it. It's really the biggest difference between all the different models. You got the original, 400 and 800, okay, and they had 8K of memory in them. And the XL series was basically, think of your PS2 Slim. So these came out in 1982, and they're essentially the same thing as the older 400 and 800. They're just smaller. This is a very, very small, very compact machine. The 600 XL here has 16K of memory, and the 800 XL had 64K. It was fully loaded with 64K of memory. Other than that, they're basically the same. There's one extra difference, and that is on the back of this one, we have the peripheral port, or the serial port, and that's how the tape drives and the floppy drives connect to it. We've got the parallel port here. That's just a cover on it, and that pops off like so. Now here we have the RF output, which most of you are familiar with, and with the RF output comes the channel select. So there's a channel, 3, channel 2, channel 3, typical switch there on the back, and then the power input and the actual power switch itself. 800 XL and the old 800 had a monitor output DIN jack, which basically had composite video in it. So on the 400 and the 600 XL, they were kind of the smaller, cheaper version. So in this case, it has less RAM, and it doesn't have the composite video output. So you have to use RF. Very small machine, like I mentioned, but it's very heavy. It's actually surprisingly heavy because I've seen pictures of it and I've seen videos, and I finally saw it in person, and it's very small. And then you go to pick it up, and for its size, it's deceivingly heavy. It's very well built. You can see all the metal shielding inside. Surprisingly well built. You have covers on the parallel ports. It's got aluminum flaps for the cart slot. Once again, the cart slot on the Commodore 64 is just, it's on the side, or the back, sorry. It's on the back, and it's just open. It's just an open gaping hole where dust and dirt can get in. And here you have these nice aluminum flaps. And then you have the aluminum buttons here: reset, options, select, start, and help. And in certain programs and games, those buttons will do different things. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the Atari 5200 video game system. The Atari 5200 on the inside is essentially one of these Atari 8-bit computers. Same processor, and just like this machine, it has 16K of RAM. The biggest difference between the Atari 5200 and this is that obviously this has a keyboard, and the Atari 5200 had those funny controller ports to take the analog controllers, and that was the biggest problem with the 5200. Those controllers always broke. This has your standard 9-pin controller ports. So you can use your Atari 2600 controllers, and you can also use, of course, just like on the Atari 2600, you can use a Sega Genesis controller. 9-pin, plugs in there, works really well. So a lot of the games that you saw on the Atari 5200, you saw on the 600 XL, the 800 XL, all those 8-bit the 8-bit Atari computers. They all run the same games for the most part, and most of them are, ports of the 5200 games, or the 5200's ports of the... You see the games on the 5200 and this, and they're the same game. These cartridges are much smaller. Once again, they have a little bit of a aluminum plate on them, really high quality. They have the spring-loaded cover to cover the actual contacts from dust, similar to the 2600 games. These are very well built, pretty heavy too for the size of them. You know, they're much smaller than a 2600 cartridge. So here I've got Defender, Centipede, Galaxian, I've got Pac-Man, and Pole Position. So I'll show off some of those. I have one accessory for it here. I've got the tape drive. You know, games came on cartridges, they came on cassette tapes, and they came on floppy disks. So there's also a floppy drive for this, which I don't have. The tape drive and the floppy drive, they both connect with this special serial cable. So I've got the serial cable for it, and you plug that into the back on the tape deck, and then the other end goes into that serial port on the back of the unit. So if we turn the machine on, it's got a basic operating system built in, just like a Commodore 64 and all those old computers of the time. So you can do your programming in BASIC right there. It's got a cool little test utility built in. What you do is hold down the option button while you turn it on, and it goes into a self-test mode where you can, let's see, select and start. So we can go through here, we can do like a memory test on it, and it's got its own built-in memory test. Alright, so taking a look at some games here, let's throw in Pac-Man. It goes in like so. I've got the Genesis controller plugged in there, so we'll turn it on. As you can see, I mean, it blows the 2600 version of Pac-Man out of the water. I mean, Pac-Man's mouth looks up and down, he's not all square looking. You know, the ghosts are different colors and they don't flicker. It also runs really quickly, the controls are really responsive, especially with the Genesis controller, that helps of course. Most of my old 2600 controllers are pretty stiff. Oh, whoa. Yeah, so great port of Pac-Man. What? Oh, he's coming. Great port of Pac-Man. And now I'll put in Galaxian. And we'll tilt that up a little bit. Make sure you can see everything. You have to press start on some of the games on the actual system. And there you go, there's Galaxian. This is a pretty good game too. And a great port once again. Like I said, most of these games are identical to the 5200 equivalents. Other than the controller that you're using. It's really the only difference. So if you like the 5200 and you like 5200 games, but you don't like the 5200 controllers, this is definitely a good alternative. And as you can see, I mean, you don't really need to know anything about actually using these old computers. Even with the floppy drive, if you put in a floppy drive game and turn on the system with only a game in the floppy drive, it automatically runs the game on the floppy drive. So it's very easy to use in that regard. You don't need to know any commands just to play programs or games. And here's Pole Position on here. Yeah, at first I didn't think this game was very impressive compared to the 2600 version. But you really have to look at just the smoothness of the curves in the road when it turns. You know, the background, the mountains and the clouds in the sky. And, you know, it runs very good too, so it is more advanced than the 2600 version. Most of the games so far have been, you know, very good for it. And like I said, they all work first try. You know, this old machine from 1982, and all these games work first try every time you put them in. So, I mean, what does that tell you about these spring-loaded covers and these spring-loaded flaps? So definitely a very good little system and a lot of good, you know, games for it.